Welcome to episode 6 of Idiom America. In episode 3, I talked a bit about the idiom cat got your tongue, and also the cat of nine tails, and that got me thinking about more idioms that involve cats, and it turns out there's quite a few. No surprise there, I suppose, for an animal that's been around with us as long as cats, living in and around our homes, coming and going as they please, catching our mice, eating our houseplants, sometimes deigning to give us affection, sometimes letting themselves receive it, sometimes disdainful of it all, but almost always seeming pretty pleased with themselves, whatever it is they're doing. I figured cats originated in ancient Egypt as domestic pets, and they did originate around there in other parts of the Near East, but it turns out they've been with us for much longer than ancient Egypt times, since about 7500 BC. So cats have been living with us as pets before the pyramids, before bronze, before Hammurabi's code or written law, before any kind of writing actually. Their rise as domestic animals seems to coincide with the rise of agriculture. As farmers started to grow and store grain, mice started to be a problem, and cats are an elegant solution. It's interesting to note that the ancient Greeks and Romans first started out using weasels as pets, as they were seen as the ideal rodent killers, but they switched over to cats as they were more pleasant to have around the house, I suppose. Anyway, fast forward today and we have about 60 breeds of cats, better than 60 breeds of weasels probably. But by contrast, dogs have about 200 breeds. So if you go by that number, it appears that dogs are the more popular pet. But maybe that's not fair, because dogs do have a head start. They were the first animal to be domesticated, probably about 15,000 years ago, although some think it was all the way back to 40,000 years ago. Compare that to the 10,000 years for cats. But if we look at another number, total population in terms of number of pets in the United States, it's a little unclear which pet's more popular. The statistics aren't great, and it's possible there are more cats as pets, with about 60 to 90 million as the estimated number of cats, versus the dogs 75 to 90 million. But if you add in the number of feral cats, there are certainly more cats than dogs in America, as feral or stray cats outpace feral dogs by a wide margin. If you just look at the definition of the word cat, it's kind of unusual in that it can refer to either a man or a woman, or just a person in a gender-neutral sort of way. So for women, putting the well-known phrase cat lady aside, calling a woman a cat can mean she's kind of a spiteful gossip. Think here of the adjective catty, or the spectacle of a cat fight involving two women. And there's also the old meaning of cats as prostitutes. It's no longer in usage, but it led to phrases like cat house, a word for brothel that's been around a really long time. And for men, calling someone a tomcat meant that they get around, and not just to cat houses. And another one along those promiscuous lines is alley cat, which can refer to either man or woman, although you usually hear it in reference to a woman. You can also just call someone a cat, as in, hey, check out this cat, or yeah, he's a cool cat. And it's usually used to refer to guys or dudes, but just as guys or dudes can refer to women, so too can cats in this sense. And another related one there is hepcat, used back in the day, the 40s mainly, to refer to those hip lovers of jazz. And for some reason, I also thought here of that Elton John song, Honky Cat, which is another way to call somebody a cat, I guess. Think, get back, honky cat, better get back to the woods. Another cat phrase associated with gender is the good old catcall, which usually refers to a man wolf whistling or calling out to a woman, usually to compliment her looks. And as a side note, a wolf whistle just means a two-note whistle containing an initial high note followed by a low note. So something like, and it can be done up close with a small whistle like that, or by calling out to a stranger walking by. The word catcall itself dates back to the 1650s, when it was a type of noisemaker that people would bring into playhouses or theaters and use to express their dissatisfaction with the performance. Apparently it sounded like an angry cat, and so hence catcall. And that meaning's still around, and you might hear somebody say something like the baseball pitcher heard angry catcalls as he walked off the field. But the other meaning's overtaking it, I think, or maybe it's just that the feminist and Me Too movements have brought more attention to this meaning recently of catcalling. And one theory about the origin of this meaning attributes it to an innovative cartoonist named Tex Avery, who was famous for characters like Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Porky Pig, Elmer Fudd. Anyway, one of his cartoons, which was voted in the 1990s as the number 7 cartoon of all time, was called Red Hot Riding Hood, and it came out in 1943, and it featured Little Red Riding Hood, now all grown up and an attractive performer in a Hollywood nightclub, as well as a big bad wolf, who was a Hollywood swinger who would come to watch her perform and drool and wolf whistle. And that wolf whistle, kind of famous one, did work in the cartoon, as she'd come over and sit beside him. And so the theory goes, this wolf whistle as a means to try to attract a woman's attention was popularized by this cartoon, which, was groundbreaking in some ways, so different than the Disney stuff. I don't know, a plausible theory, but it still doesn't really explain how that wolf whistle came to be called a catcall. And another theory goes that ship captains would use that two-toned wolf whistle to get a sailor's attention, and that sailors would in turn use it when they were ashore to get a woman's attention as she walked by. And again, that seems plausible, but doesn't really shed light on how catcall came to be used to describe that wolf whistle. But I can see how it'd be natural enough for a phrase used to refer to jeering at somebody in the theater or the baseball field to come to refer to leering at women with calls or whistles, and at some point in the last century, it did. At least that phrase has baked into it the idea that it's not something that's appreciated by the person being catcalled at, whether they be in the theater or on the street walking by. The meaning of some of these cat idioms seems pretty self-evident. Fight like cats and dogs, for example, which is one that I've heard more than once to refer to a mismatched pair in a bad marriage, as it carries a meaning of fighting long and loud without any resolution in sight. And it's also heard a lot to refer to political opponents, unfortunately. And this one actually goes back a few hundred years. Another one that goes back a long time is, in that vein, is play a cat and mouse game with somebody. And the dictionary has a few different definitions for this one. One, a game with the constant pursuit, near captures, and repeated escapes. Two, watchful waiting for the best opportunity to strike, like you're in a cat and mouse mood, for example. And three, a game involving constant torment prior to destruction or defeat. And with respect to that last meaning, however, I read somewhere that when you see a cat batting around what looks like a dead or nearly dead mouse or some other prey animal, that the cat's not just toying with it to torment it, but it's just the cat's cautious natural instinct to do that with prey until it's satisfied it no longer presents any danger. And that seems fair enough to me. Cats have never seemed to be the gratuitously cruel type. There's also another cat and mouse idiom here. When the cat's away, the mice will play. And its meaning is also clear enough, that without supervision, people will do as they please, maybe even break some rules, like when the teacher leaves the classroom. And this one has been around for several hundred years, since 1600 or earlier. And it also appears in a lot of other languages. In Russian, for example, you have Без кота мышам раздолье, which translates as, without the cat, the mice have expanse or liberty. And similar phrases go back as early as the 1300s, where you find a phrase that says, when there is no cat, the rat is king. Then there's some cat idioms that you think you know the origin of, but you might be surprised. And one of those for me was to grin like a Cheshire cat. I figured that this one had to come from Alice in Wonderland, and that trippy pink and purple grinning Cheshire cat. But it turns out that this phrase actually dates all the way back to at least 1788, when it had this entry in a classical dictionary of the vulgar tongue. Cheshire cat, he grins like a Cheshire cat, said of anyone who shows his teeth and gums in laughing. This phrase doesn't seem so vulgar to me, but I'm sure the people writing the dictionaries back then probably considered themselves pretty highbrow. Anyway, the origin of this one has never really been properly accounted for. Some say that it's because the county of Cheshire in England had a lot of dairy farms, and therefore the cats there were said to always be grinning because of the abundance of milk. Some say that a particular type of cheese in that county used to be molded in the shape of a cat that looked like it was grinning. But the one I like best is that there was some highfalutin family in that county that had a lion in their family crest, and they hired this sign painter to paint their crest on the ends that they owned around that county. But the sign painter was so inept or hapless that his attempts at painting lions ended up looking more like grinning cats instead, and so people started to refer to them as cats, and then the phrase just kind of percolated and stuck. Thinking of a cat grinning mischievously brings to mind another idiom in this vein, when somebody's looking like the cat that swallowed the canary. And this one's also heard as the cat that ate the canary, or the cat that swallowed the pigeon, or the cat that got the cream. And it's used to refer to someone who appears smug and overly pleased with themselves. And often it carries with it the connotation of looking guilty as well, smug and guilty of something mischievous at the same time. And from what I can tell, this phrase appeared around the turn of the 20th century, as it starts popping up all over right around then. Here's a 1907 magazine advertisement for a new work of fiction called The Cat and the Canary by Margaret Cameron. The cat that ate the canary must have smiled like the Cheshire cat he was. This delightful book gives the same sense of pleased satisfaction. The cat, however, is symbolic. This book is one of the best little comedies of married life ever written. Somehow I doubt that a book that crams two cat idioms into the same pitch and then still feels the need to explain to its potential readers that the cat here is symbolic is one of the best little comedies about anything ever written. But maybe that's just me. On a serious note, cats do eat canaries and more. In the United States alone, it's estimated that outdoor cats kill approximately 2.4 billion birds every year, and possibly up to 4 billion. And that's billion with a B. Some bird experts say that predation by domestic cats is the number one direct human-caused threat to birds in North America. And feral or unowned cats, as opposed to pets, are the main cause of this carnage. And some have suggested programs that would target these stray cats. And I can see that. On the other hand, these cats also kill up to 5 times that number of mice and other small animals, and no one wants those. No one wants more mice and rats running around, so there's a trade-off there. I remember our outdoor cats growing up, how they would bring prey home, dead prey, but they brought mainly mice home to show them off to us, to show us they were earning their keep. But every now and again they did bring home a dead bird, and it did seem like they liked to hunt birds better than about anything. But maybe they were too domesticized because they usually weren't successful, and it just seemed like it was play for them more than a serious pursuit of food like mousing did. At any rate, this brings to mind another cat idiom. Well, look what the cat dragged in. And another version of that was when you called somebody that they looked like something that the cat dragged in. And this first version, of course, is used to refer to someone when they first enter the room, usually in a teasing kind of way to imply that they're disagreeable or undesirable somehow. And it's another one that first started getting used a lot in the early 1900s. And the second version used to refer to someone who looks bedraggled or disheveled, exhausted, somebody who looks like they've been through the ringer. It appears around the same time. And I can't trace these to any one particular origin story, but the meaning seems pretty natural and clear enough to anybody who's seen a cat bring home a dead animal in its mouth. There can be some positive cat idioms too. If something is the bee's knees, you could also call it the cat's meow, an old-timey way of saying that something's pretty awesome. And you could also call it the cat's pajamas. This one, the cat's pajamas, is one of those that is fairly easy to trace. It comes from the 1920s as a slang term that was used in the flapper community. Flappers used it a lot, apparently, and they even had their own dictionary called appropriately enough the Flapper's Dictionary. which was a glossary that a flapper wrote in the 1920s, and it defined this phrase among others. And if you're not familiar with flappers, I like this first sentence from their Wikipedia article that defines them as a generation of young Western women in the 1920s who wore short skirts. Knee height was considered short during that time period. Bobbed their hair, listened to jazz, and flaunted their disdain for what was considered acceptable behavior. Kind of a dry definition for people who were anything but dry. Anyway, there's some fascinating etymological speculation as to the origin of the term flapper, but I'll try to stay on track with cats. Maybe another episode. Some say that the cat's pajamas was just one of those nonsense phrases that flappers came up with back in those days. That is, the cool kids back in the 1920s would take something like an animal and combine it with a part of the human body and use it to refer to something groovy. So besides the bee's knees, you got the gnat's elbow, the elephant's wrist, the eel's ankles, the bullfrog's beard, the snake's hips, the kipper's knickers, and the monkey's eyebrows, just to name a few. And not all of these, only the bee's knees and the cat's pajamas are still around, and you don't hear either of those that often, especially cat's pajamas. Others say that the phrase comes from the fact that pajamas were just starting to become popular around that time among the more risque crowd as daytime apparel. So you'd be a cool cat indeed if you were a flapper wearing pajamas back in the 20s, I guess. Others attribute both the cat's pajamas and the cat's meow to the cartoonist Tad Dorgan, who was active around that time, and this one's definitely possible. There's a paper trail for it, and Dorgan was one of those prolific coiners or popularizers of new phrases. Among the words and expressions that he's generally credited with either creating or popularizing are dumbbell, for crying out loud, cat's meow and cat's pajamas, applesauce, meaning nonsense, hard-boiled, as in tough and unsentimental, drugstore cowboy, loafer or ladies' man, nickel nurser for a miser, and as busy as a one-armed paper hanger for somebody who's overworked. There are also a lot of words, not strictly idioms, but just words that come from the word cat, and perhaps my favorite one is caterwaul, which means to make a shrill howling or wailing noise like that of a cat. That's a word that doesn't get used enough, I think. You see it in print a fair bit, but rarely hear it spoken. Or maybe it's just the circles I run in, I don't know. And just to list briefly a few more of these type of words. Cat fit, meaning a conniption or a fit of rage or hysterics. Cat lap, a weak watery drink fit only for a cat to lap. Cat-eyed, having eyes resembling those of a cat or able to see in the dark. Cat slide, the kind of roof that slopes very low and often nearly to the ground. Cat hole, the kind of hole you dig when you're out backpacking to dispose of waste, human or otherwise. Catgut, a type of cord prepared from the natural fibers found in the walls of animal intestines. Cat ice, that thin, often milky ice from under which the water is receded, leaving it supported only around its edges. It's also known as shell ice. There are also a bunch of other cat idioms that I haven't touched on yet, including some of the most famous ones like curiosity killed the cat and let the cat out of the bag. And I want to explore those, but that's about it for me for now, though. So I'll try to come back to these in another episode. Cat idioms part 2, say. So stay tuned, and thanks for listening.